21st century is a century that will be claimed by countries and regions that embrace information, communication technologies, and artificial intelligence. Indeed, the fourth industrial revolution, which our countries can claim, will be defined by ICT, 3D printing, and artificial intelligence. Honorable Ministers and Attorney Generals, there are some who are of the view that since the first, second, and third industrial revolution bypassed the African continent in general and the COMESA region in particular, that we cannot be part of the fourth industrial revolution. This pessimistic position is not supported by empirical evidence, in that all we need is to embrace the following three overarching principles. One, we should be, as countries, knowledge, societies, and economies. And secondly, we should be learning societies and economies. And thirdly, we should be innovation societies and economies. For our countries and economies to become knowledge, learning, and innovation economies, there is a need to disrupt the existing order. It is, honorable ministers, against this background that COMESA has embarked on implementing programs that eliminates the drudgery associated with manual systems that require different levels of verification and auditing through the implementation of the blockchain technology. In simple language, blockchain technology is a system of recording transactions and keeping records in a manner that they are tamper-proof, self-auditing, and automatically verifiable by parties to the transaction. Since I'm addressing Ministers of Justice and Attorney Generals, let me give you a typical example of what you can do in the realm of law. A simple example is the registration and ownership of land, which is currently subject in many member states to litigation when ownership is disputed. Not only among ourselves, I've seen cases where foreign investors come and they will also take governments to court and say, I was given that piece of land. And they can produce documents which look authentic, but they may not be authentic. But it may be difficult for the judiciary to be able to determine the authenticity of those documents because of the way we keep our records. What am I saying here? What I'm saying here is that with the implementation of the blockchain technology, which is based on what we call the ledger or redistributive ledger, the ledger has its origin in the 13th century. It's used by bookkeepers. They enter on the debit side, they enter on the credit side, then they do the reconciliations. But what this system does is that through those entries that are entered, all the parties to those entries should be able to verify and confirm online that ownership is changing hands. So if you implement that, you'll not have a problem. How often do we hear of court records being tampered with or being stolen? And I think we all know that some of the cases you hear that there was a court record, but the court record has disappeared. But if you use the blockchain, there is no court record that will disappear. There is no tampering with the record that will happen because it is tamper-proof. Because all parties, if it is the defense lawyers, the ones that are representing the litigants, if it is the judges, they will all have the same record, and the only time the record can be changed is when all parties confirm that that record can be changed. This is why we say it is tamper-proof. So it is therefore important that when we have immutable and tamper-proof records, we can then improve our governance.
We ought to remember that increased trade or economic growth does not automatically translate into sustainable development and employment and wealth creation. we need to do more. We need to multiply our efforts to come up with legal instruments that will enable us to ensure that our trade translates into poverty reduction, through which the ordinary citizens of COMESA will see positive changes in his or her life. And as His Excellency the Secretary General said, those legal instruments on their own shall not deliver to the people of COMESA. Those legal instruments must be implemented. They must be translated into action. I'm therefore happy to note that, apart from considering draft legal instruments that will strengthen governance in the form of financial rules and regulations, we're beginning to move to instruments that will help us tap into trade in services. The draft legal instruments aimed at implementation of the COMESA Seamless Airspace program speak to this. Indeed, the high cost of doing business in the COMESA region is largely due to high transport costs, like Mr. Sindiso Ngwenya indicated. And it is our hope that the COMESA Seamless Airspace program will contribute to bringing down the cost of air transport in our region. Colleague ministers, attorneys general, distinguished delegates, I'm also pleased and grateful to note that we have continued to strengthen the governance structures and instruments of our institutions in order to ensure that we get value for money for our subventions to the institutions. I am therefore confident that the adoption of financial and procurement regulations for the COMESA Competition Commission will strengthen the institution which is discharging its mandate quite well.